Hey all, and welcome back to another video from some dev dude. Today we are going to be looking at another SQL injection lab from PortSwigger Academy. This time we'll be using a SQL injection union attack to find out the column data types. So rehashing on SQL union commands. So a SQL union command can be used to concatenate and combine the result set of two or more queries. There is a couple caveats that we can use to find out data and we can exploit with our knowledge of SQL, is that all the queries must return the same number of columns in the query, and that the columns must match up in their data types. This is useful because we can force errors to occur when the data type doesn't match or when the number of columns don't match. In the last video, on the last lab, we figured out the number of columns by causing SQL errors. In this video, we're going to be using the example queries that we have on the screen right now to find out the data types. So if you just look at the example queries or the injections, you can see that in the first one, we put in a string value. So refreshing on what a string is a series of characters. They can be numbers, letters, or symbols. And there's a sequence of those, so 0 or more. So a good example of a string is actually the error message that we have here. This would be a string because it is a sequence of numbers, numbers, letters, or symbols. In this case, using this query, the top query here, we would find out if the first row was a string or not. And then, as you can see, we shift the string, or the A, down the line until we find out what columns are strings. And yeah, we're going to jump in. I'm going to open this one in a new tab. And we're going to click on Access the Lab. And while this starts up, we're going to read the lab description. So this lab contains a SQL injection vulnerability in the product category filter. The results from the query are returned in the application's response. So you can use a union attack to retrieve data from other tables. To construct such an attack, you first need to determine the number of columns returned by the query. You can do this using a technique you learned in the previous lab. So adding a null or a select null and adding more nulls until you get a response. The next step is identify a column that is compatible with string data. The lab will provide you a random value that you need to make appear within the query results. To solve the lab, perform a SQL injection union attack that returns an additional row containing the value provided. This technique helps you determine which columns are compatible with string data. So here we go. We have our lab here. We're just going to open this up in Burp Suite. Starting a temporary project, using the defaults. And here we go. In this case, we want to use proxy. I'm going to open browser. I'm going to paste the URL. I'm going to close that. I'm going to put in our keychain password. Cool. So we know the exploit is in the category filter. So we're going to apply category. Let's go pets. And we're just going to inspect the data result set here. We can see that there's 4 results. We got price and we got view details. So first step, we're going to go over to Burp Suite and we're going to use repeater to figure out how many columns there are. So we're going to take the filter request with the category and send that to repeater. So we can keep on modifying data or modifying the requests to see what happens. So using URL notation, we're going to do plus union plus select plus null dash dash. So this should, if there's more than one column, fail. And yeah, we have an internal server error. I'm going to quickly make this bigger. So let's add another column. and another error. So we're going to continue adding on. And we have a response that isn't an error, so we know that there are 3 columns. Let's have a look what the page is returning. Nothing much has changed, except the page title, probably indicating that they get the title from the URL. Okay, so we know how many columns there are. Let's figure out what the data types are. So I'm going to type in A and hit send. So we can make the assumption that the first data type is not a string. Let's type in A again here. Okay, so we can make the assumption that the second column is a string. And I'm just going to chuck in another another A, just to get all the data we can. Cool, so we know that the second entry is a string. Oops, delete a bit I didn't want to. It's going to revert this back to null and send it again. Okay, so the one thing that we notice is that it is appending our A value here. That's because, again, a union returns the result set of 2 queries. So make the database retrieve the string bbgu2s. It's gonna, I can't copy that. That's annoying. I'm gonna head over to here. I'm gonna copy this one. And then gonna replace the A value with bbgu2s. And click send. And that's returned. And we can see that we've solved the lab. And we minimize Burp Suite. Okay, so how does this work? We have the expected query, and again, this is just a guesstimation of what I can gather. We have the ID, the name, and the price from products where category equals gifts. So there's 3 columns, and then we can make a good assumption that the name is a string column. So we input the following. We tried union select A, null, null, and then we move the A down, and finally in the final position. And again, this is after we determined the number of columns returned in the first query. So this changes the result. In this case, we did select ID, name, price from products where category equals gifts, but we also added our own SQL code. So we added the union, and then the select null, A, null, and dash dash to ignore the rest of the query. This allowed us to determine the type of columns that is returned, which we can use now in the future to get more information from the database. Thank you for joining me again on another video. I hope you learned something. If you have any comments or anything to add, please leave it in the comment section below, and I hope to see you in the next video.